Hey guys, welcome back to the AJ Analysis channel, where today we are discussing one of the biggest games of the season, the top two teams in England going head to head, Arsenal and of course Manchester City. So let's take a look at how it went down. So before we continue with the video, I want to talk to you guys about where I got this shirt from, and you probably guessed it, jerseyfifa.com. They have kindly sponsored today's video and also sent me a load of free shirts for me to check out myself, and I can now really vouch for the quality of these products. They have loads of shirts to offer on the website, so if you are interested, head to the link in the description down below and check out Jersey FIFA for yourself. So of course, Manchester City went on to win the match 3-1 to go to the top of the table. However, kind of the pattern of this video isn't necessarily going to follow that, because that isn't how the pattern of the game went. Yes, Manchester City won, however, Arsenal really had a lot of the ball in this game, 64% possession in fact. That's right, a Manchester City side had 36% of the ball. So with Arsenal having 64%, that is what we are going to focus on initially, because of course that's what we saw for most of the game, so that is an important side of it. And when Arsenal had the ball at the back, Manchester City actually gave them a little bit of time. They didn't seem too interested in putting on a high press. Ramsdale, for example, wasn't put under too much pressure. Neither were players like Gabriel and Saliba, certainly during the first hour or so of the match. And it meant that Arsenal could build possession, get the ball to the centre-backs, and then build from there. From here, this is where things instantly get very, very interesting, because Arsenal had a few different build-up phases, shapes I should say. So when we talk about a team in these areas, a team typically has one shape which they'll stick to. Maybe, for example, a 2-3 shape, and an extra player will drop in occasionally. Arsenal, on the other hand, were just so fluid with the way that they looked to build possession. There were 3 or 4 different shapes which they used in this area to try and get the ball moving forward. And as a result, it meant that we then saw a few different shapes from Manchester City as well, of course to try and counter it. So this is where the game for me was really at its most interesting. This is where we were seeing that tactical chess battle between Arteta and Guardiola. And kind of the first phase we saw early on was Tomiyasu playing as a natural right back, Jorginho playing in a double pivot with Zinchenko tucking inside, as we know he so often loves to do, and then Xhaka and Odegaard pushing further forward, forming what is a 2-3-4-1 shape in possession for Arsenal. Now, in order to try and nullify this, to try and address this, Manchester City used a slightly different shape to what they typically would. They used this back 4, as we would expect, with Bernardo Silva at left back, which in itself is quite interesting. Then a midfield 3, but then 2 very, very narrow wingers. So it was essentially almost a 4-3-2-1 out of possession from Manchester City during the early stages of the game. The idea of this is to stop Arsenal overloading the middle of the pitch, because we can see that Arsenal have Zinchenko, Jorginho, Odegaard and Xhaka in these areas. If Manchester City didn't get players narrow, they could have very easily got outnumbered. So Pep Guardiola wanted to narrow off in these areas and stop Arsenal progressing the ball through the lines. However, this did leave room for someone like Tomiyasu at right back, where I feel like Arsenal were restricted a bit by the fact that they didn't have Ben White in this area. I think Ben White going forward this season has been very impressive. Tomiyasu didn't really offer the same threat, and as a result, Manchester City was sort of happy to let him have possession. However, what we did see from Arsenal was then a change in shape. They're struggling to get the ball through the middle, so they needed to try and open up the pitch. And the way that they looked to do this was by exploiting the fact that Grealish wanted to follow Jorginho and Mahrez wanted to follow Zinchenko. And what we would see is Jorginho often dropping into a back 3 alongside the 2 centre-backs, allowing Tomiyasu to push further forward, and this then draws Grealish out of position slightly. So now if Arsenal are able to move the ball and get it into here, someone like Xhaka can now be a little bit deeper, or Odegaard can drop into these areas, and this is just instantly one way in which Arsenal are pulling the Manchester City midfield about. But of course, Manchester City are constantly reacting, and then Arsenal are changing shape, and then City are reacting, and it just keeps happening. So of course, as I was saying there, with Jorginho dropping to the side, it does open up this bit of space in the middle where perhaps Odegaard can get on the ball, perhaps Nketiah could at times drop into these deeper areas, but still, despite dragging Grealish out of position, Manchester City still had a lot of numbers in these areas. So Arsenal were still, to an extent, struggling to get the ball progressed in these areas. So, again, they changed shape, as all good teams do. And what we saw now was Granit Xhaka dropping into a left-back position, or a left midfield position if you like. So Zinchenko is inverted with Mahrez following him, and now Xhaka has this lovely bit of room which he can operate in on the left-hand side. And let's say someone like Gabriel has the ball, this is going to give Riyad Mahrez a decision to make. Does he stick tight on Zinchenko, allowing an easy progression to Xhaka, or does he go out and mark Xhaka, which then means Zinchenko is free, so perhaps De Bruyne has to be dragged out, and then you can get into the spaces in behind the Manchester City midfield. So this is a very clever change from Arteta, moving Xhaka into this wider area, because suddenly it starts asking a different question of Manchester City. However, Despite this, still City were defending really well. They were really putting a big shift off the ball in this game. We're not used to seeing City have, 36% of the ball. However, out of possession, they did continue to put in a really, really good shift. Whilst I do think that Manchester City deserve credit for the way that they defended, I also think Arsenal could have been a bit sharper. Because, for example, Xhaka getting the ball in this area with this amount of space, he should be able to make more of it. There's no hiding the matter there. He's in a lot of room, a professional footballer playing at the top level. At the time they were playing top of the table, a player in that position should be able to do a bit better, but he wasn't able to. So again, what does Arteta do? He makes a change, he swaps Xhaka and Zinchenko around. Now you've got a bit more of a natural shape from Arsenal. You've got a 2-4 shape, with now a left back in Zinchenko playing at left back, a very technically secure left back, who is now going to take greater advantage of this room out wide. So Mahrez is still tucking on Xhaka. The likes of De Bruyne, Rodri and Gundogan are still trying to crowd these central areas to stop Arsenal getting easy progression there. However, what it's now going to do is you've got Tomiyasu and Zinchenko both in room in the 2 wide areas, which now means easy wide ball progression. And interesting ploy by Pep Guardiola, if you ask me. I get the idea of crowding the centre of the pitch because Arsenal are very good there. However, Arsenal were also very good out wide with Martinelli and Saka. Walker against Martinelli. Walker looked a better player. Martinelli really struggled in this game, and I think he has for a few weeks now. On the other side, though, is where it's really interesting. Saka up against Bernardo Silva. Bernardo Silva, as much as I love him, is not a left back. However, he done really well in this game. He should have been booked much earlier than what he was, so perhaps that would have changed the game. He did make a lot of fouls on Saka. However, I think he done a really good job in this area. And in general, Manchester City's fullbacks stopped these Arsenal wingers having much success. And then, again, to kind of help them out as well, Pep Guardiola made a change, moved to more of a 4-4-2, with Grealish and Mahrez dropping deeper and wider. We then see Haaland and De Bruyne go up front. And this was an attempt to stop the ball being progressed so easily out wide, because you can see Tomiyasu and Saka, whereas before they were 2 versus 1 against Bernardo, we've now got Grealish here as well. And Grealish put in a really good defensive shift, helping in these areas, whilst Mahrez also tried to do something similar on the other side. However, this doesn't solve all of Manchester City's problems, because now they have a problem in the middle, because now they are outnumbered, with Haaland and De Bruyne often getting caught a little bit higher, not really affecting the ball too much. Means that Arsenal now have Xhaka, Jorginho and Odegaard up against a midfield 2 when Arsenal were able to stretch Manchester City wider with the wingers, which now, of course, is that middle overload which we know that Arsenal love to create. After this, we did then see a spell where Arsenal were able to get the ball forward much easier, because if Gundogan's getting drawed out towards Jorginho, then Odegaard's able to get the ball in space, or if Gundogan is too concerned dropping off on Odegaard, then Jorginho has room to bring the ball forward. Again, I feel like if Arsenal had Thomas Partey in this game, it could have been a different match, because he brings that extra bit of quality, and his right-hand side just wasn't as threatening as what it has been so far this season. However, Arsenal were having some joy in the middle of the pitch. So, what does Pep Guardiola do? He makes a change, and now he plays a much more narrow and compact 4-4-2. So whereas at this state in the game, the 4-4-2 was quite wide and exposed, he now really narrowed his team off. Made them really narrow and compact, and said, okay, we're going to go back to what we were doing early on. You can't progress the ball through the middle of the pitch. Now suddenly, yes, Arsenal still technically have the overload in these areas, but because it's so compact with Mahrez and Grealish coming in, there just isn't the room to find players between the lines. What does this mean? It means that, again, the room is out wide. However, for one reason or another, Saka and Martinelli just didn't have their best performances, and as a result, it worked really well for Manchester City because they were able to defend these wide areas. Every time Arsenal made a change, Manchester City had a counter change to measure it, and as a result, Arsenal didn't create too much in this game. Like I said, I think having Thomas Partey, Ben White in the side would have helped. Also, Saka and Martinelli just weren't at their best in this particular game. Manchester City defended really well, kept themselves in the game despite not playing well, despite not having too much possession, and then of course they were good enough on the ball to collect the 3 goals and the 3 points. So this from here is where the video starts to take a bit of a weird shape, because we're talking about how Manchester City won the game. However, we've just spent 10 minutes talking about all of Arsenal's good attacking principles. To be fair, some good Manchester City defending. However, Manchester City on the ball, which we're now going to look at now, is going to get way less coverage, because, as I keep saying, 36% of the ball. So, really weird game from Pep Guardiola. This isn't what we expect from Manchester City, to have so little of the ball. And to be honest, when they had the ball, they weren't very good. This wasn't perfect for Manchester City. This wasn't like they didn't have much of the ball, but when they did, they were really good cutting through Arsenal. That simply wasn't the case. And until changes were made later on, which we will come on to, Arsenal dealt with Manchester City very well. And that is because Manchester City built possession in a 3-2 shape. Bernardo Silva, who was of course starting at left back, moved straight into midfield. When Manchester City had the ball, they didn't have a left back. Now, the problem with that is it makes you very, very easy to press. Because what Arsenal were able to do is put Saka on Ake, Nketiah on Diaz, Martinelli on Walker, Xhaka on Rodri, Odegaard on Bernardo Silva. We've then got Jorginho on Gundogan, we've got Gabriel on Kevin De Bruyne, and Saliba on Haaland. Arsenal are able to go man for man in literally every area of the pitch. So Ederson can't exactly play a ball into Rodri here because Xhaka is right on him. He can't play the ball into Bernardo Silva because Odegaard is there, who's got a good intensity about him. You can't go long to De Bruyne. You can't go long, chip it out wide to Walker on this side. And on the left side, there literally physically isn't a player there to chip it to. So the only options are Ake and Diaz. However, as soon as they get the ball, Arsenal are able to squeeze over, compact that side of the pitch, press, again give that player no option on the ball, and stop Manchester City. And this is again where Arteta deserves credit for his defensive approach to the game. Or the defensive side of the game, I should say. The pressing was really, really good. Manchester City couldn't deal with it. Pep Guardiola didn't really have an answer. The only thing that Manchester City really had in the first half was long balls from Ederson. He attempted over 20 long passes in this game, which just isn't Manchester City-like. Either out to Grealish looking for 1v1s against Tomiyasu or Mahrez, however, they're both receiving the ball on the back foot, so it's quite difficult. The other option is to go long to Haaland against Saliba. A really, really fascinating battle. I absolutely love the battle between these two young, powerful players who are going to be at the top of the game for the next decade. Battling it out was a really, really good game. There were battles which Saliba won, there were battles which Haaland won. A great battle between the two of them. However, still it didn't really lead to much in terms of chance creation. What did lead to chance creation, though, was mistakes, really. And that is the problem with a man-to-man press from Arsenal's point of view, is that you don't have a cover player, a player covering round. So typically, let's say, if Saliba was to make a mistake here on Haaland, you'd have Gabriel covering round. However, because he's pressing on De Bruyne, you don't have that leeway. So when you make a mistake in a man-to-man system, it really does cost you. And ultimately, Arsenal made mistakes at bad times. Of course, for the first goal, Tomiyasu makes a mistake once the ball has been played long. Tries to play it backwards. De Bruyne races in and chips it over the goalkeeper with a brilliant finish. Doesn't chip it over the goalkeeper. He lofts it over the goalkeeper with a really, really good finish. However, still, Manchester City weren't playing very well. However, like what we saw from Arteta, Pep Guardiola made a change, and for me, this changed the entire football match. So the change we saw from Manchester City was a Akanji here coming on for Riyad Mahrez. It sounds like a very defensive change, however, it helped them from an attacking point of view. It meant that Ake was now able to move to left back, so initially, Manchester City now actually have a player in this space, and it means Bernardo Silva can go to the right wing. From a defensive point of view, this helped as well, because his intensity was able to track Zinchenko better than what Mahrez did. But importantly, it helped Manchester City on the ball. Yes, at times they still struggle to play through the press, however, we can now see it is much harder for Arsenal to go man for man, because now we have this extra player back here. Arsenal can't just spawn in an extra player. So, initially it worked well from here, and as a result, Manchester City were able to build possession, build a head of steam a bit, and that's where they started creating chances from. The big thing for me, really, in the second half was that Manchester City just had a more natural shape. They're now playing in what is a 2-3-4-1, a 2-3-5, a 2-3-2-3, whatever you want to call it, and it just has a more natural balance to it. You've got more width on the pitch, which is normally such a key part of Pep Guardiola and Manchester City's sides. You've got players playing on different lines. For example, you've got Haaland on this line here, then got De Bruyne here, perhaps Gundogan here, Rodri here, so it's a bit more difficult for Arsenal to mark. You can pull players about a bit. But importantly, they've just got players in different areas now. For example, Ake at left back here, there wasn't a player here before. So now Saka has more of a defensive job to do. Before he could perhaps tuck in and really overload the middle of the pitch, now he does have to be wary of players like Nathan Ake. And with Arsenal defending in a 4-4-2 for large periods of the game, but City possessing a lot of quality on the ball, it meant that they could get Rodri into these pockets, which then means that you can outnumber these two Arsenal midfielders with Rodri, Gundogan and De Bruyne. Perfect players to kind of make these overloads happen. We've got Bernardo Silva producing quality on this side, which then means that, for example, if Grealish is building the ball down the left-hand side here, it means that if Gundogan can make the run here, De Bruyne can make the run, now you have a 5 versus 4 across this line. So you've got Bernardo Silva, De Bruyne, Haaland, Gundogan and Grealish up against the back four of Arsenal, which means, let's say Tomiyasu comes out to Grealish, Saliba comes to Gundogan, Gabriel comes to Haaland, Zinchenko comes to De Bruyne, you've got the free man on the other side. And for me, this was just where Manchester City started to take control of the game. And I'll be honest, still from a tactical point of view, it wasn't great from Manchester City. I thought these changes were good and got them right back in the game, so Guardiola absolutely deserves credit for that. However, for me, it doesn't sound very analytical, but for me the difference in this game was that these Manchester City players have been there and done it. most of them. Of course, Haaland hasn't actually won the league with Manchester City. However, the rest of them have literally last season. Several of them have done it plenty of times over the past decade or so. This felt like, in the second half, a side which have been there and done it before and won the Premier League against a team which are trying to win their first Premier League, which is literally what it was, and that is very much how it felt in the second half. That extra experience from Manchester City, they felt like they were in, not cruise control, but it just felt like they were in their element in the second half. Like, again, they've been there and done it. They know what to do in these situations. Whereas Arsenal were a little bit shaky, a little bit panicky on the ball, a little bit too direct at times, giving Manchester City the ball, surrendering possession. And we just know you can't do that against this Manchester City side. They're too good. And ultimately, for me, that is how Manchester City won this football match 3-1. So we've seen some brilliant tactical battles during this game. We've seen Arteta with his fluid approach in possession. We've seen Manchester City adapting to it constantly and actually defending pretty well. We've then seen Manchester City being a pretty stale shape on the ball, which Arsenal pressed very well, before Pep Guardiola made changes, changed the shape, went to a more natural approach to the game, that 2-3-4-1 shape. Arsenal struggled to cope with it. Arteta perhaps didn't adapt quick enough. Manchester City won the game with big moments from individuals, whereas Arsenal's big individuals were making mistakes in key moments. So that, my friends, is how Manchester City won this game 3-1. But as always, make sure to let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you have enjoyed the video. And as always, I will see you in the next one.